Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through full food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. And this week I'm with Russell Norman, the award-winning restaurateur, writer and broadcaster who brought Italy to the British High Street. First through Polpo, the book and chain of Venetian-style restaurants which gave us small plate food culture, and now Brutto, the Florentine trattoria next to London's Smithfield market.
The essential Florentine experience of standing in the street with a lampredotto roll with ladlefuls of salsa verde and chili sauce is what people remember when they go to Florence, and I think is quite important, not just in culinary terms but in cultural terms.
Brutto, the book, is about much more than the recipes of the restaurant. It's an ode to Florence, where we find what Russell calls the ugly but beautiful food that the Tuscan capital is really all about. Not so long ago, a Rough Guides or a Lonely Planet may have said that it's art that is its essence. But I asked Russell why food has become the only way to find your way to the heart of this Italian city.
I think that, the 20 regions of Italy and individual cities have a great deal of pride when it comes to their cuisine and what makes them different and what makes them unique from the other 19 regions. And Florence in Tuscany is no exception. So when I first visited Florence, everybody said you have to have tripe, you have to eat lampredotto, you have to eat bollito misto, you have to have the bistecca alla Fiorentina. And so my first experience of Florence was through those dishes and through the traditions, I suppose, the culinary traditions that define that particular city. So yes, you can go to the Uffizi. Yes, you can go to the Accademia. You can see Michelangelo's David. You can explore the city through its other cultural aspects. But for me, Florence was very much about its food history and its food traditions and its culinary history, I suppose. And so subsequent visits to the city were about exploring more of its food credentials and history, and I got a great sense of its cultural identity through food, and continue to do so. And that was the inspiration, I suppose, for Brutto.
You've said so much there, but actually unpacking it. It's about tasting the city, isn't it? We had Giulia Scarpaleggia on a couple of weeks back talking about cucina povera. And of course, she's from Florence and she talks about lampredotto. And she talks a lot about offal. And, to a British listener, there's a kind of a sense of, oh, my Lord. Can you just explain why you have to stand in a street eating tripe, with it all dripping down you and kind of somehow mastering how to do that delicately or giving that up completely. And somehow that leads you on a liminal journey into somewhere deep inside the Italian soul.
You're right. You can't do it delicately. You stand in the street in front of a tripe stall. There's one that comes to mind immediately, which is just outside the Mercato Centrale. And there's a sign on the tripe stall which says, "We can't cut your sandwich in half; it will make a mess." This is something that I discovered very early on. It is messy. It is street food. You will get sort of a dribble of juice and salsa verde and chili sauce down your chin when you eat it. But just grab another napkin. But the reason that it's an important experience, and the reason that that Florentines love tripe in particular, but also other parts of the animal, is because they have what we now describe, I suppose, as a nose to tail philosophy. Nothing is wasted. Yes, you can enjoy a prime T-bone steak cooked over charcoal with salt and possibly with a little olive oil, though that's a little bit controversial. Whether you use olive oil in Florence or not is still something I haven't quite worked out. Somebody told me once that the only two seasonings for a classic bistecca alla Fiorentina are salt and fire. And I love the idea. I love the idea of fire being a seasoning. But it is. But when it comes to tripe, it's there are four stomachs to the cow, and whereas in this country, it's very rare to see tripe. because it's, it's put into, farm animals, food mixes and so on. But in Florence, it's revered because they waste nothing. And you mentioned cucina povera, and this tradition doesn't just exist in Tuscany; it exists in all of the regions in various forms, and it's about using everything and not wasting anything. So, the number of recipes, for example, that I read in Tuscany and beyond that call for stale bread, for example, gives you a very good indication that nothing's wasted. The bread from 3 or 4 days ago never goes in the bin, ever. And it's the same with tripe, I suppose. It's the same philosophy. You waste nothing. And Florentines have embraced that. And made tripe their signature dish, I suppose. And as I said before, there are 4 stomachs to the cow. And Lampredotto is the 4th stomach, which is sort of crinkly and brown. The other 3 stomachs have different textures and colours. One of them looks like sort of honeycomb. One of them is slightly scary and it has lots of holes in, which is something that a lot of people react negatively to, because there's a condition called trypophobia, which is the fear of holes. The sort of texture you get in coral, for example, yes. Or honeycomb. Anyway, I digress. So yes, the essential Florentine experience of standing in the street with a Lampredotto roll, with ladlefuls of salsa verde and chili sauce is what people remember when they go to Florence, and it's something that I think is quite important. Not just in culinary terms, but in cultural terms.
Well, I was going to say it's about a lot of people go to Florence to see the aesthetics. When you go into the centre of the city, you cannot believe. I took my daughter there for her 16th birthday, and she just couldn't believe the look of the place. It just, every time you turned a corner, it was just like, oh my God, this is extraordinary. But I think what you're saying is this journey into the depths of the Italian soul, the Florentine soul, is about something much more. It's about understanding their relationship with their history, with poverty. Beauty is not skin deep, and it's about really accessing that. It's interesting that restaurants and food should provide that role. I'm thinking back to, our very short relationship with food from the continent, as it were. We haven't been going to Europe as Brits for very long. And perhaps when we first discovered Italian food, we felt there was a great distance to it. We've kind of closed that gap a little. We're much more food literate now. But this feels like a next step. It feels like almost you can't go to Florence without tasting its street food. It's awful. Is that just more education, or is that a way of dividing foodies into super foodies and just food tourists?
Absolutely. So the first thing, I suppose, just working backwards, is that in the past, and when I say in the past, I mean within my lifetime, and even now, there's a sort of conception of Italian food that it's pizza, it's pasta, it's vitello tonato, it's veal Milanese, etc., and you will still find restaurants in London, good restaurants. I'm not dissing the restaurants that do what I'm about to describe, but you will find restaurants that will offer a menu which is pretty much the top of the pops, the greatest hits of Italian cooking, and they will take dishes from every single one of the 20 regions. When you talk about super foodies, there is a new generation. I think there's a new appetite, pun intended, for regional Italian cooking, and people understand that that the food of Tuscany is different from the food of Sicily, which is different from the food of Puglia, which is different from the food of Veneto, and so on and so on and so on. And so you will find restaurants now that that specialize in a particular region, or even in a particular city. which is what I've done through my career. So, when I opened Polpo in 2009, it was specifically the food of Venice and Veneto. Brutto, which I opened 2 years ago, is specifically the food of Florence and Tuscany. And I think people understand now that Italy isn't actually a country. I know it sounds weird to say that, but it's 20 countries. And,
it's a jigsaw puzzle.
It's a jigsaw puzzle, but, every region has its own traditions and its own sense of pride in the food that it serves. And I would say that, a city like Florence, represents itself, not just, as you mentioned with your 16-year-old daughter going and, being wowed by the architecture and by the art and so on. Florentines of course, they have a sense of pride in their Renaissance credentials, but they also have a sense of pride in terms of their food. And you go to somewhere like Trattoria Sostanza, for example, 6 tables, 24 covers, 2 waiters, 2 chefs, and that's it. The menu never, ever, ever changes. It's a canteen environment. It's been there for 150 years. But what they do is they showcase their cultural heritage, and they showcase their sense of Florentine authenticity through the food. And, the sense of pride in that place, just to use that one place, Sostanza as an example, the sense of pride is astonishing. And it's a way that Florentines can connect with their past and connect with their culture and connect with their history and represent it through food. And
yeah,
I'd say it's as important as Michelangelo or Donatello, in any of the museums that you want to go to.
It's so interesting. I totally agree with you. And let's talk about Polpo very briefly. When you brought Polpo to the Brits, you were bringing the small plate aesthetic. You were bringing their manners, the manners of Venice to the high street, actually. It was a no bookings, just walk in, enjoy the kind of the Venetian vibe. And it was very much a high street experience. How can you bring that sort of taste aesthetic? How can that possibly work by just sitting people in front of smaller plates and offering them a menu that they may not have seen before?
It was a huge risk. I spent a lot of time going to Venice since my first visit as a student in the mid to late 80s. It got under my skin, and I went back as often as I could. And it was only on subsequent visits that that I started to see these little wine bars that served little snacks, which are known in Venice as baccari. And it was then that I started to get the idea that I enjoyed that experience, and Venetians enjoy that experience of usually standing. That there are very rarely seats in a baccaro, and eating little tastes, little flavors, little sort of representations of the lagoon and Veneto and Venice and beyond. And it was then that I thought, would this work in London? This Venetian aesthetic, or Brighton,
London,
indeed.
Yes. Brighton, I'm not so sure. It was a great place to go. It did very well in Brighton.
It did.
But that's what I'm trying to work out. What was the answer when you were asking yourself, would it work in London or Brighton? Before you saw it, how did you think it would translate?
I always look to myself when it comes to restaurant ideas and what I think might work. And the question I ask myself is, well, if I like it, will there be other people that like it too? And the answer that I give myself is, well, yeah, there must be some other people that get it. I never try to second guess opinion, and I never try to second guess what people will like. I just look to myself and I think, well, if I like it, I'm hoping that other people will be like me and they will like it too. So when I say that Polpo was a risk, that's the risk I took. I just sort of, it was a hunch that other people would be like me. I
noticed that you have a drama background. You were a drama
Yes.
teacher, weren't you?
I was head of drama for 4 years.
That's right. And I remember talking to Rick Stein about the theatre of the restaurant. He was a DJ, and he really loved bringing people into a different state of being. I wonder if this is what you do, that you create a theatrical experience so that there's a transcendent experience. You take people into a space that really isn't Venice and isn't Florence, but has an essence of it enough for them to play the part. You know, when I walked into Brutto yesterday, oh my God, it was amazing. It was just such fun. There's this vibe. There's so many people there. But it wasn't a trattoria. It wasn't like any experience I'd had in Florence. It was very much London people having lunch and eating lovely food in a beautiful place. And I wonder if that's what you're doing. You're kind of like the puppet master, giving us all a little experience of life through Russell's prism.
You've hit the nail completely on the head. Yeah, it is theatre. It is an experience. It's not just food. You know, there are so many elements to creating a great restaurant. You know, I've said before, and I'll say it again. You know, that my job as a restaurateur is to welcome people in from the street and to, you know, nourish them and restore them. If you think about the meaning of the word restaurant and the meaning of the word restaurateur, it's the French verb restaurer, which means to restore. So my philosophy, I suppose, is to take you, for example, Gilly, yesterday, off the street, to gently place you on a seat at a table, to nourish you and to entertain you, not in a sort of a gauche way, but the entertainment is just the people around you and the experience, and to make you feel better about yourself and the world by the time you leave 2.5 hours later. And then I will gently place you back on the street into your taxi or down to Farringdon Station for the Elizabeth line or whatever, and you feel nourished and you feel like you've had an experience that's that's enriching and nourishing, but not just not just in terms of food. When I say nourishing, it's I don't want to sound sort of fluffy, and it is about making people feel better. And you do that. You do that with food. You do that with wine, but you also do it with the environment. And I think the most important thing in a restaurant environment is people. It's the people that you take in and sit down and feed. It's the companions that you sit down with, your friends and so on. It's the staff that you interact with, and it's all about people. Yeah, my background as a drama teacher, and I spent a little bit of time directing as well. So it wasn't just education; it was theatre too, and that definitely informs my restaurants. Quite often commented upon amongst my staff that when I sort of stand in a circle with them before the shift starts and go through the specials and talk about the dishes that we that we have on the menu for those new members of staff, and talk about other aspects of service and so on. At the end of the briefing, and I didn't realize I was doing this, but this has been pointed out to me several times. At the end of the briefing, apparently, I quite often look at everybody, clap my hands together and say, okay, it's showtime.
Yeah, you're the director.
It sounds incredibly cheesy. I'm sorry. But yes, it is a performance. Yeah. It is. And when the curtain goes up, to extend the metaphor, when the curtain goes up, for example, at 5:30 at Brutto, when the kitchen opens and people are queuing outside or having drinks at the bar or having drinks at the external tables, it feels like the beginning
wonderful.
Of a show.
And every night is a different night. How absolutely wonderful.
Of course.
Let's go through some of the food on the table, because
sure.
These are your food moments, and we'll start off with what you call Cuddles.
Yeah,
so coccoli, this is one of the antipasti.
Yes. I mean, it's quite substantial. It's that tradition of street food. You pick it up with your fingers. You don't use cutlery.
And they're deep-fried dough balls.
They are. So stracchino, which is a raw cow's milk, soft cheese with a lovely sort of sour tang to it. And then the prosciutto, which is, has that lovely buttery quality and flavour with the deep fried dough balls. You just stuff the cheese and the prosciutto into the split dough ball, and squash it together like a sandwich and eat it. And I first had it at a restaurant called I Brindoloni in San Frediano, between San Frediano and Oltrano. And it was just one of those moments when I thought, okay, I was looking for a signature dish for Brutto, and I thought, okay, got it and won. And so I was very fortunate that my senior sous chef, Alan Williams, who was working in Bologna pre-COVID, and then when everything shut down, he was still living in Bologna, didn't have a job because all the restaurants were closed, and just spent his time baking. And he made a sourdough starter in Bologna in 2020. And then when I hired him the following year as my senior sous chef, he said, well, I brought this over in my hand luggage, the sourdough starter that he'd made the year before in Bologna. Can I use it for the bread dough at Brutto? I said, yes, Alan, of course. And so we still use the same mother that was created 3.5 years ago. So every single one of our coccoli is made with the mother from Alan's sourdough starter in Bologna in 2020.
Wow, now I'm really cross with myself for not choosing this one, but I had to have the anchovies. Tell me about the Penne alla vodka. Why did you choose this as a second food moment?
So I mentioned Sostanza, and talked about I Brindoloni. One of the other restaurants that I was introduced to quite early on in my visits to Florence was a really raucous, chaotic place on the ring road, which sort of is on the outskirts of Florence. So it takes about 15-20 minutes to walk there from the centre of Florence. And the restaurant's called Alla Bettola. It's tiled on the floor, on the ceiling, and on the walls. Everything is a hard surface. So when I say cacophonous, I mean it literally. It's impossible to have a conversation, but all it does is make you shout even louder. The food's okay. It's not great. It's a canteen. You see at lunchtime, you'll see guys in high-vis vests and hard hats. So whereas in London, these guys, the construction workers, will go to a greasy spoon and have a bacon sandwich. In Italy and in Florence in particular, these guys go to a proper restaurant and have a couple of courses with a half a litre of Chianti. Yeah. And the first time I visited, I was told by my friend who introduced me to Alla Bettola, you have to have the Penne alla vodka. I said, sorry, what? What? It's pasta with vodka? Are you crazy? He said, no, you have to have it. And of course, the vodka is just an ingredient which evaporates and dissipates. So you're not eating pasta with 40% alcohol. It's an ingredient that just enriches and binds the flavors together, the tomato and the chili, onion, little bit of cream, garlic, parmesan, and it was a wonderful experience. And I thought, wow, I have to serve this at Brutto. And it was only afterwards that I did a bit of research and found that it was a sort of 1970s and 1980s dinner party favorite. So incredibly kitsch. And then it sort of had a revival with Alla Bettola, and there are a couple of restaurants in New York as well. I think Carbone also serves Penne alla vodka, and it's one of their most popular dishes as well. And it's very popular at Brutto.
And would those guys in the high-vis vests be eating the penne alla vodka?
Of course. Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
That's extraordinary. Because while I was there yesterday at Brutto, I mean, it's literally just opposite Smithfield, and I was wondering if, the kind of the market traders would go and have lunch at Brutto, and I couldn't imagine that they would.
No,
they absolutely wouldn't.
In Italy, there's definitely a tradition of going to a proper restaurant. Even if you're sort of digging up tarmac at 7 o'clock in the morning.
But these guys I was thinking of were the guys who would be selling amazing meat.
Yeah.
And your third food moment is the bistecca alla Fiorentina.
Yeah. Yes.
And this is about the quality of meat. And I was just wondering whether the guys who are actually selling the quality of the meat would ever come to eat that kind of quality in a place like Brutto, because actually by the time you're going to get a great big T-bone steak on your plate, it's going to cost a fortune. And I know that you said that you really wanted to keep the costs low at Brutto. How can you get really good quality meat and persuade people who perhaps don't put a great value on the real cost of food? How do we change that? Because that's the essence of Italian culinary taste, isn't it? They understand, they have a connection with the food, they understand how to pay for it, but also that doesn't cost that much.
So with the bistecca alla Fiorentina, I always knew it was going to be a high price item. It was going to be, for people that wanted a little bit of a blowout, or a little bit of theatre, a bit of an occasion. And so it was important to me to have it on the menu as an option, but also to have 19 other dishes on the menu which weren't expensive, that were very affordable. But if you wanted to blow out and have this insanely delicious, I mean, we obviously have to get our meat domestically. So we use a 150-year-old firm at Smithfield Market called Longcroft and Old. They get their meat from Aberdeenshire. It comes down to Smithfield Market. They hang it for 30 days. They then deliver it to us in 15-kilogram loins, or we go and collect it ourselves, which is quite fun. So, walking across from Smithfield Market to Brutto with a 15-kilogram side of cow on your shoulder is quite something. And we butcher it ourselves in the restaurant. So there's a lot of husbandry. There's a lot of expense. When it comes to us, it's already expensive. And we have to, charge a premium price for it. But I think at the moment it's £9.50 per 100 grams. Which it's not a huge amount.
But I think it says much more about the true cost of food in Britain.
Yes.
That is an ongoing story.
Yes.
Let's finish off with your final food moment, scrobino. Now, I couldn't even think about going on to the dolce after, my 2 courses. How on earth do you get to a dolce? You say, actually, you don't, just have a scrobino.
So, Gilly, I agree with you completely. So when it comes to the 4th course of a traditional Italian meal, the dolce, I can't face anything else. However, scrobino sort of covers the gap because it's very light. It's mostly liquid. It has a lovely sharpness because of the lemon sorbet. And as with most Italian desserts, it's all about the booze. So Italians love their alcohol. Tiramisu is loaded with rum and marsala. The classic Venetian biscotti dunked into Vinsanto is all about the Vinsanto. It's not about the biscuit. And scrobino is just one of those lovely light desserts. 3 ingredients: lemon sorbet, vodka, prosecco, but it's all about the technique. So it's usually made tableside in restaurants in Italy, and it's about the combination of those three ingredients and making it into something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And so a scroppino for me is the perfect end to any meal.
And it's about time, isn't it? Ultimately, this wonderful sort of experience, this theatrical experience, this education of the real heart of Italian food culture, and what you really need to really make it go down very sweetly indeed is time. How can we learn how to lunch like the Italians?
Oh gosh, I don't know. But they know how to lunch. I mentioned the construction workers, that go to Alla Vecchia Bettola, or going back to Venice. There's a restaurant in Cannaregio called Dalla Marisa, and every single time I've eaten there at lunchtime, I'm literally shoulder to shoulder with construction workers. It's like a canteen. I mean, the set menu, the 3-course set menu with half a litre of wine and coffee included and water included is €17. So, you go to a Greasy Spoon and get a bacon sandwich and, a coffee and a donut to take away. It's the same price. And so, these construction workers, office workers know how to eat. They always give themselves an hour and a half or 2 hours for lunch in the afternoon. And it's a very different culture, but one that I absolutely adore. And this is why, my businesses have always been about Italy and about creating that Italian philosophy in London and in the UK.
Thanks for listening. Do rate and review the podcast if you like it over on Apple Podcasts, and then head to my Substack to see what Russell has cooked up for us over on Extra Bites.